Well, I'm talking with Daniel Loffer, who just so happens to be my composer as well. And this is the first thing we did was Unfortunate Circumstance, which was 2008. So that was some time ago.
Well, yeah, you could say so.
And
It's been a while.
yeah, and he also did Sincere Prospect for me, which if you guys want to see it, it's online. You can buy it on Amazon. But we're here to talk about his new album, Sunday Mood Swings. And but first off, just to, I guess, to get to know you, how did you? Because you're a relatively young guy. We're both young guys. How did you get started in music?
Well, I used to play instruments from a very young age, I think. I used to study the accordion, and at some point I got bored, so I messed around with the piano, and it just kept going from there.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point I got interested in film music, and I had a keyboard, so I was messing around with it, and the computer, so it just kept developing, so to speak.
Yeah, and because we're both big Hans Zimmer fans, that's how I found you, was on the Hans Zimmer forum. So, what other?
That was the influence.
Yeah, I got an ambulance driving by here, but so besides Hans, are there any other influences? Other composers that influence you?
Well, another influence is Harry Gregson Williams, I think. Those might be the two biggest influences from the film music world.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are, of course, others you listen to. I mean, it happens automatically very often.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, contemporary artists like Radiohead. I listen a lot to Radiohead, Massive Attack, and, well, a lot of music I listen to and just suck it up somehow.
Yeah, and the reason why because I remember when I was looking for a composer, I put out like on the forum, I was like, I'm looking, and the reason why I picked your music was because it sounded so, or even though you were using samples and MIDI and all that, and it sounded so organic, and everyone else just sounded so fake and didn't sound like it had any emotion behind it. What's the key to making sure because you're usually working with a budget, and what's the key to making sure that even if the music is not recorded live, what's the key to making it sound good?
I can't really tell you this because I honestly don't know. Perhaps it just works. I think you have to feel it, even though it's a computer. You have to somehow feel the music, and if you cannot feel it, it's crap,
Yeah.
So if I write a cue or a song or whatever, and I can't feel it, I usually end up deleting it or not finishing it because where's the point?
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably more difficult with a computer. But basically, I think it's still the same because even with live instruments, you can create music that doesn't create any feelings and atmosphere.
Right.
So just noise.
Yeah. Which, I mean, you don't create noise. That's a good thing. That's why.
Thank you.
That's why I picked you. And but you also, you're not just a musician. You also direct films. You have a bunch of short films and stuff that you work on. And how was it like being behind the camera too? Are you the way you? I don't know how a musician would direct a film. I know there are many directors, that also do their own scores. Well, actually, very few. I mean, Clint Eastwood is like one of the few. But are you thinking musically when you're making a film?
I am very often. I mean, I usually edit my films with a very, very close idea in my head to what the score should sound like. I often use temp tracks. Well, sometimes I listen to the music when I'm writing the script in advance, so
Right.
everything comes together. I don't really separate those parts.
Have you ever came up with an idea from music that you've written and then went off that to make a film from it?
I don't think so far, but it's like, to me, it's a bit like colors,
Yeah.
You see those images in your head, and you want the film to be like that. But like, there are certain there are certain colors in these images, but there's also music. So it's not just the images; it's also the sound, and everything comes together. And that's the idea.
Hmm. And so now you have a new album coming out, which I also love. You do songs and you actually you wrote an original song for Sincere Prospect, which was great. And so how did Sunday Mood Swings come to be? What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, I'm not really new to this entire album thing because I
Hmm.
produced two albums before in 2007 and 2008. So it's not really a new concept. The difference now is that back then I just wrote tracks whenever I felt like it, and then I took them and threw them together in a bowl and called it an album. And this time I really had the plan from the beginning to create something that would fit together to make sense. I mean, I'm listening not very much to film music these days. I used to, but these days it's different music.
Yeah.
And you want to create something like that. I'm an album person myself. I don't listen to songs. I listen to albums,
Hmm.
and I like the way they develop, the way they choose the songs. So this is something I wanted to give a shot here.
So when you're creating an album, and I mean you do create it as a whole piece. So when you're writing the songs and everything, how do you approach it almost as a storytelling technique? Is it do you have like a 3-act structure to it? Do you want the songs to flow into one another?
Well, you have different songs with different speeds and tempos, and you want a certain mix of songs. Then you have to create these songs in a style that will fit together in the end, and to create a certain atmosphere, to build up tension perhaps at some point, to lower it down a bit, to create something more tense, more subtle. I don't know. It's hard to explain really,
Yeah.
because there was no concept in the beginning, but still I knew this track would fit or this track wouldn't fit because it sounded right or wrong.
Hmm. And do you talk about because I listened to the EP that you just released, and you have a great singer.
Thank you.
That you're working with. Tell us about her.
Well, that's Chloe Charles. She's from Toronto,
Hmm.
and I actually met her when she had a gig with another band here. They were supporting a band in Germany at a gig here in my hometown,
Hmm.
and I saw her live. And so I decided to contact her because I really liked her voice back then,
Hmm.
and I thought it would be cool to have her on this album. This was actually the first song I had written for this album, and it was very, very few days after the gig, I think, and I still had the entire thing in my head.
Hmm.
I had bought the CD and listened to it, so they were sort of the influence on the song that would end up with her on the vocals.
Yeah, and she does a fantastic job. So,
She's great. She's really great.
yeah. So when you're did you write the lyrics to the song too, or did she do the lyrics?
Well, she did that.
Uh-huh. And you just did the music around it.
I just did the instrumental and sent it over to her, and she came up with the rest.
And but are you collaborating with anybody else on the album, or is it just you?
Well, there are a few musicians involved and people I know, friends. There's Johannes Karl, a guy I know, and we're meeting every now and then to make music. Often it's just jamming around.
Hmm.
On this track, on this album, we have a track called La Rue Le Pic. It's actually in French language for some reason, and it got developed in a jam session that lasted around 5 minutes. So we just sat down. I had the accordion, he had a guitar, and we just messed with our instruments, and it turned into a track, and we added vocals and percussion and everything. There's also Ilona Blank. She's a friend of the both of us as well, and she does the vocals and on 2 tracks.
Hmm.
So I tried to create a more diverse kind of sound
Yeah.
when it comes to the vocals.
Yeah, yeah, and so because do you have your own studio set up, like
Well, it's at home, so
yeah,
it's
a home studio.
where I live. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like my home editing station. But,
exactly,
uh,
exactly.
um, let's go back to. I kind of want to talk about how we worked on my films because like everyone should know by now, but you live in Germany and I was living in Maryland at the time, and we really didn't speak. We kind of communicated via the internet, via instant messaging and chatting. And have you done that kind of collaboration with anybody else before?
Well, unfortunately, it's the usual way for me because even though I sometimes have the chance to meet with the director or talk to them,
Hmm.
it's very difficult because, after all, I got thrown into this world by the internet. And
Right.
where I live, there are no film studios, no directors. There's the internet, you know.
Hmm.
So it's basically the only way for me right now to do something like that. And from there, you can start. And yeah, I think it's a new way, but I think it's getting more common these days because many people I know who are working more in this business are working over the internet. I mean, there are even recording sessions over the internet now.
Yeah, I just talked to three great composers I did an interview, and beforehand, one of them, was in England, one of them was in New York, one of them, they were spread all over, and that's how they communicated. But I think the way I don't know, I like the way that we worked because I got so many compliments about the music, and they're like, "Who's your composer?" And I was like, it's this this guy Daniel," and it's like, "Well, where is he?" He's like, "Oh, he's in Germany." So, but so looking at your writing process, at least when it comes to film, what's the big inspiration? If you're not directing, if you're just writing the music, what are you looking at? Do you when you're looking at footage? Are you looking for a story? Are you looking for character? A little bit of both. What gives you the most inspiration to write?
For film, you mean?
Yeah, for film.
Well, I think that depends really. I mean, sometimes you start by getting the screenplay from the director months in advance. So that's the first inspiration. You already come up with themes. Then sometimes you show images, and then sometimes the rough cut is actually the first time you see and hear anything of the film. So it's very often the first impression, and then
Hmm.
sometimes it just develops because, like I said before, when I create my own films, everything connects in a way from the beginning. So usually there's already some idea in my head when I see this the first time, and I feel this is
Right.
what belongs to be there.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not that different, I think.
And looking at Sincere Prospect, um, what I remember you. I gave you some, I remember you sent me something really early on, and I think before I actually sent you any footage, you tried to write a theme or a piece or something. Or I remember I sent you one piece of footage, and you wrote something, and I was like, I don't think this is right, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna toss it out. So.
Yeah, might be. I don't remember, but it seems likely.
You're like, yeah, I just gave you one piece, and you just went ahead before I could, because I remember our schedules were, because you were working on Dancing with the Storms, very close to that, right?
Yeah, I think I was. Yeah.
And that was that got a big release, right? Didn't it?
Well, the film did in Switzerland. It was. I mean, it's not very big release, but
Hmm.
it was shown in many theaters. Perhaps more indie theaters there, no multiplex theaters, and still it was a really big success for me and for the filmmaker, of course,
Hmm.
because we had never done something that big before.
And what I mean, you were scoring they're about storm chasers, and you were scoring a documentary. But the soundtrack is so big and so epic. And I remember I was listening to it in my car once, and someone's like, "Oh, who is this?" And I was like, "Oh, this is Daniel. This is my composer." He's like, "Oh my god, it sounds like this is great." But did you do any live instrumentation for that, or was it still all electronic?
Most of it is sampled, but I had a cello player and I had a clarinet player, and we also had a song that we added, and I had someone who played the trumpet. So I just composed everything with samples, and then in the end we try to record a few cues sometimes, perhaps everything the instrument played on the entire score, with live instruments to replace it. Of course, most of it is sampled now, but it's just these little themes now that somehow stand out because they just have even more emotion in it than the sampled version did.
And for you, how important is a theme? You are a very thematic writer, and I know that some composers, they kind of go with the more ambient, atmospheric scores, but how important is a theme for you when you're writing a score?
It depends, I suppose. I mean, there are really films with great scores that are very subtle and not very thematic, but then most of the time there is the theme for me, and you go from there. But often it's more like, instead of an actual theme, you have this kind of atmosphere and some sort of perhaps synthesizers or soundscapes, and they can create something like a theme, because even though they're not a melody, they create this mood, and when you hear this, you have this mood that would otherwise be created by a certain theme. So I wouldn't necessarily, call it a melody, but it's still a thematic way of approaching it, I think.
That's fair. But I remember, because everyone at least told me they love the themes you did for Unfortunate Circumstance and for Sincere Prospects. That's why I said
they were more thematic scores.
Yeah, I told you I wanted thematic scores. I was like, make sure you have a central theme for this character and bring. But to wrap up, I'm going to ask you the question that I ask every composer. If you had the chance to score any film ever made, with no disrespect to the original composer, what movie would you pick?
Oh, well, give me a second to think. I mean, it's a rough one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I think it's if you wanted to attempt, like, in a dream, just anything that you'd want to try, that you would love to try your hand at, a film that you love.
I mean, most of the films I really love already have a score that's great, because it just works so well together, and without the great music it wouldn't be that great, so I wouldn't love this film so much. It just belongs together.
Yeah, they do.
And it would be hard to give it a shot.
So you're not gonna pick one?
I would, if I really had to choose, I could perhaps choose Eraserhead, because it doesn't really have an actual score, just ambient sounds.
That's a good choice.
And I think something could work there, but then it wouldn't be that creepy anymore, and you would already lose.
That's a good pick. No, that's a good pick. Well, that's all I have for you right now, Daniel. But thanks so much for talking.
Thank you for having me.
And hopefully I'll start making a movie one of these days, so we can work together again.
Do that.